UFC Fight Night, Beneil Dariush versus Arman Tsarukyan. Welcome to another UFC prediction and analysis video presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. Harris flying solo today, but the show must go on. As usual, we provide you with fight-by-fight breakdown and analysis from that betting perspective specifically. Want to let you know which fights are worth the value, which fights to avoid, which underdog has the best shot at winning, and some parlay action toward the end of the video as well. Make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel here at Boxing MMA Picks. And most importantly, want to hear from you in the comments when it's all said and done. Now, for this UFC Fight Night, it is taking place in front of a live crowd. It is in Austin, Texas. We have 13 fights overall, 6 of them on the main card, 7 of them on the prelims. Let's get started right away with fight number 1 of our prelims. We're looking at Veronica taking on Jamey-Lyn Horth. Jamey-Lyn Horth beat Hailey Cowan. That was back in her April debut. She's introduced as a kickboxer. She has a kick-heavy style, patient, fights effectively from distance. She picks her shots pretty well. Not afraid to get aggressive as well. Not afraid to engage with her opponents, really mix it up. Also works the clinch pretty effectively. She can land takedowns as well. She has solid top control. 2 submission victories to her name as well. 5 of her 6 wins in general are via finish, and most of them, interestingly enough, are in round 3. So that tells you that she is one of those fighters that are dangerous throughout the fight. The cardio is there, the toughness is there, and let's see how she fares in her second fight in the UFC, taking on Veronica, who had a great return to the UFC in her unanimous decision win over Juliana Miller back in March. She's light on her feet, a lot of movement, fights from the outside. She's a former Taekwondo USA national youth champion, so she's ultimately coming from a striking background. Good striking speed. She showed clean striking, especially in her last fight. Good hands, stayed patient in that fight as well. Also landed 4 takedowns in that fight. So that shows you that she does have that capability. She made good clinch decisions. She defended submissions very well against Juliana Miller that likes to grapple. She also showed good top control in that fight. Her cardio also held in her last fight. What's interesting is that this is something that she has struggled with in the past, but I mean, clearly a fighter who has made a lot of improvements after taking 3 years off when she returned back in March. Good fight to start us off. This is 2 very capable fighters here in this women's flyweight division. I can see the fight going either way. Of course, we see Vegas's odds pretty much reflecting that. Both of these ladies are good strikers. I anticipate Veronica having the speed advantage, while I anticipate Jamey-Lyn Horth being the aggressor, closing distance as the bigger fighter. We see she's going to have 3 inches in height. She debuted at 135, but she's pretty much a flyweight. So I can see her, again, closing distance as the bigger fighter. I think both of them can play the clinch game. I think both of them can land takedowns. Veronica historically has not had good takedown defense, but I think it's something that can, and I think it's something that can cost her in this fight, especially as the smaller fighter. I do feel it's a close fight. I think it's hard to feel strongly in either direction, but I'm going to go with Jamey-Lyn Horth for this fight because I like her chances of her being the aggressor. I like her chances of her dictating the pace. I think that her being the bigger fighter will be a meaningful advantage for her. I mean, again, can't be too confident in either direction, but from a prediction perspective, I'm looking at Jamey-Lyn Horth to remain undefeated. Fight number 2 of our prelims, Wellington Turman versus Jared Gooden. Welterweight fight here. Turman unanimous decision loss to Randy Brown. That was back in June. 2 losses in a row for Turman now. He has heavy hands. He has a hard jab. Has pretty good power, good kicks. Kind of lacks the striking speed, but he can definitely clip you if he lands. Good clinch, solid takedown ability, good wrestling ability as well with his frame. He's going to be one of those fighters that stays on your back, that attempts multiple takedowns at a time. Won't really rush that takedown attempt either. Not the best at defending the takedown, just 45% on that side of things, but he is a good grappler. Almost half of his wins are via submission. So this is a fighter who is comfortable on the ground. Jared Gooden had unanimous decision loss to Colston Harris back in March. Gooden is a striker, keeps his hands low. He has big power. Not really the cleanest striker, but he's one of those fighters who can swing big and land big. Half of his wins are via KO, TKO. He has 22 professional wins. So the power and the explosiveness is probably his greatest asset. He is a bit reckless. He does have a bit of a sort of zombie-like forward pressure. And he's hittable, right? He absorbs more shots than he dishes out. His cardio isn't amazing either. Simply put, I don't look at Jared Gooden as a high-level fighter. To me, he's a fighter that, has a puncher's chance in any fight that he's in, but he's not a fighter that really possesses great overall MMA skill at this level, in my opinion. Wellington Turman, on the other hand, not really the highest level fighter either, right? He doesn't have a high pace. He can be outstruck. His takedown defense isn't great. And we have seen him finished before. Gooden, to that point, Gooden absolutely has a puncher's chance in this one. But if we're talking about overall MMA skill, Wellington Turman should win pretty easily here. Jared Gooden, just 68% takedown defense. Turman should have the better ground game, all things considered, should be able to land a takedown, all things considered. And in terms of the striking, I think that Turman, probably is the cleaner striker of the two, capable of landing a fight-changing punch of his own. So it's not just Jared Gooden that's coming into this fight with power. Turman's coming into this fight with power as well. And ultimately, I look at Turman as having more ways to win the fight, where neither guy has amazing cardio. So I expect Turman to be able to win 2 rounds using the takedowns, using the cleaner striking, using sort of the overall MMA advantage that he should have in this fight. So my pick is going to be Wellington Turman. Fight number 3 of our prelims, Rodolfo Bellato versus Ihor Potieria. We have a lightweight fight here, light heavyweight fight, I should say. Potieria lost to Carlos Ulberg. That was back in May. He's a striker, good hands, solid combinations, good forward pressure. He's light on his feet, at least early in the fight. His striking looks more relaxed. His movement looks pretty relaxed. He picks his shots pretty well. He's patient as a striker, but he is a bit one-dimensional as a fighter. Clinch game is lacking. Takedown defense is lacking. Cardio is lacking a bit as well. He's one of those fighters I've seen slow down, noticeably even after that first round. And also, when we think about durability, he has 4 losses, which is okay, but 3 of those 4 losses are via KO, TKO. So going to have to watch out. He has not been the most durable in his fights. He's taking on Rodolfo Bellato, who is making his UFC debut. He's on a 3-fight winning streak in general. He won on Dana White Contender Series back in October. He also lost on Dana White Contender Series in the past, but that was to Vitor Petrino, right? Petrino has had a good UFC run so far. He also dropped Vitor Petrino in that fight. So that lets you know what he's capable of. 6 of his 11 wins are via KO, TKO. So the punching power is absolutely there with Rodolfo Bellato. He has good striking for this division, good forward pressure, likes to control center of the cage, good calf kick as well. Pretty patient with what I've seen with him. He has a good long jab. We see in this fight, the reach is going to be the same, the height is going to be the same, but just the way he uses his jab is pretty effective. He can also land takedowns effectively from what I've seen. Good top control to go along with that, and good takedown defense, very active with defending those takedowns, even though that probably doesn't matter in this fight for him. Also, expect high-level BJJ from him in general. He does have 4 wins via submission. He does have good grappling IQ. And sort of most importantly for this fight, his cardio, from what I've seen, is pretty reliable. He's been in 5-round fights before. So really, looking at a really balanced prospect that's coming into the UFC here. And we see he's a big favorite, so I'll keep this one pretty short. I think Bellato is a big favorite, despite it being his debut, and I can absolutely see why that's the case. I think Bellato is going to have the significantly better ground game in this fight. He will be the one that is able to land takedowns against Potieria's 33% takedown defense. So he's going to have that significant ground advantage, significant wrestling advantage, significant grappling advantage as well. In terms of the striking, Bellato probably the cleaner striker should be more effective as the fighter who commits to that forward pressure. But sort of more importantly than that, because Potieria is a pretty decent striker, more importantly than that actual striking battle, Bellato will have the better cardio and should be able to pull away in this fight after that first round. Now, you never know with a newcomer. You never know at this weight class. I mean, we say heavyweight beware all the time on this channel, but light heavyweight beware in some ways is very much a warning as well. Anything can happen, especially that both of these guys are able to strike. But I do think that Rodolfo Bellato should be a pretty comfortable pick here. He's just a better fighter, all things considered, and has advantages everywhere that he needs to. So I'm going to go with Rodolfo Bellato to get it done. Big favorite for a reason. I see him pulling it out. Fight number 4 of our prelims, Steve Garcia versus Melquizael Costa. For Steve Garcia, he's on a 2-fight winning streak. He beat Jamey-Lyn Nordembieke back in April. Pretty solid hands with Steve Garcia, light on his feet. Jab is solid. He can put combinations together, not afraid to engage with his opponents at all. Look for forward pressure from him. Fights at a high pace, especially early in the fight. Almost a kill or be killed type of style. He can leave himself open to counters. He can be chinny. Although just one of his 5 losses via KO, TKO, I have seen him clipped on several occasions. Has a bit of a ground game as well, can land takedowns. He landed 4 takedowns in his 5 UFC fights overall to this point. So he is capable of it on a fight over fight basis. Plus 94% takedown defense, which could be very relevant for this fight. So capable striker, good at keeping it on the feet. That's always a dangerous combination to have. Melquizael Costa, on the other hand, beat Austin Lingo back in July. He has a patient striking style, good jab, a lot of kicks, looks controlled with his striking, has good consistent pressure on the feet, good combinations, good striking IQ. For example, in his last fight, he outstruck Austin Lingo 100-39. So that lets you know that he has that ability to really be effective with his striking, because Lingo is a good striker, all things considered. Just 42% takedown defense, which could be meaningful for this fight. He can also land takedowns. He does have jiu-jitsu experience. He can work his way back to his feet if he is taken down. Ultimately, you're looking at a well-rounded fighter with pretty good striking. The striking has looked pretty good. I think this is a good spot for Costa to get it done. I think you're finding decent value with the odds here. It's going to be a striking fight, if you ask me. I think Garcia can land takedowns, but it's not really an active part of his game. Melquizael Costa, on the other hand, he can land takedowns, but he may not need it, in addition to Steve Garcia having good takedown defense. When I think about the striking, both guys can strike, but I do believe that Costa is the higher level striker. I think Costa is the more dynamic striker. I think his striking IQ is going to play a factor in this fight. A Costa finish would not surprise me. Otherwise, I'm expecting unanimous decision win type of fight for Melquizael Costa. Again, I think he's just at a higher level, all things considered, than Steve Garcia. Let's talk fight number 5 of our prelims. We're looking at Drakkar Klose versus Joe Solecki. Really good lightweight fight here. Solecki's on a 2-fight winning streak, beating Carl Deaton back in February. He's introduced as a boxer grappler, pretty good on the feet to that boxing mention, good lateral movement, good crisp hands, good boxing technique. His footwork could be a bit more fluid, but look for him to use that almost awkward movement to close distance effectively. To that point, really good takedowns, good wrestling, good positional improvements, active ground and pound. Plus, he is a BJJ black belt, again, to that grappler mention in terms of how he's introduced. He's taking on Drakkar Klose, who is a very capable fighter. He's also on a 2-fight winning streak, though the last time that he fought was against Rafa Garcia 17 months ago. So we could be looking at a little bit of ring rust with Drakkar Klose. Good stand-up, good power, good striking speed as well. He can definitely be explosive, really solid kicks to go along with it. And he's one of those people that are definitely willing to engage with his opponents. He's usually the one pushing the pressure, pushing the pace, forcing it on his opponents. I can absolutely anticipate that being the case in this fight. to that point, he is prone to takedowns, just 69% on the defense side of things, but he can also land takedowns at almost 2 takedowns per fight. It's going to be one of those fights where both fighters can do a bit of everything. I am looking at this as a 50-50 fight, as the odds would indicate. Now, in terms of the striking, again, both guys are capable. I'd say that Drakkar Klose is probably the better overall striker, more dynamic, more aggressive at the very least. In terms of the ground game, I think I'm going to give the edge to Solecki. I think he uses his ground game a lot more intentionally and a lot more effectively between these two fighters. Now, it's tough to really feel strongly on either side. Again, this is a close fight, but personally, I'm going to lean Joe Solecki for this one. As we see, he's a slight underdog here. And I'm going to lean with Joe Solecki because I think that the takedowns will make a difference. We saw Rafa Garcia implement top control against Drakkar Klose. That tells me that Solecki should be capable of implementing that takedown game as well, that top control game as well, except I think that Joe Solecki will be able to do it more effectively than, or more intentionally, or more actively than Rafa Garcia was able to do it. So I think that that's going to put Joe Solecki in a spot where he can pull out 2 rounds. I think it's going to be a super close fight, but I think those takedowns will make a difference. So I think there's definitely some underdog value on Joe Solecki, and Joe Solecki is also going to be my prediction for this fight. Fight number 6 of our prelims, let's talk Zach Reese versus Cody Brundage. Brundage beat Jacob Malkoun back in September. I mean, if we can call that beating. That fight, he essentially lost, but Malkoun was DQ'd with an illegal strike to the back of the head. Decent stand-up, that said, from Cody Brundage. He has a lot of stick and move, trains with really good strikers, a lot of level changes, a lot of fakes, mixes it up really well, has decent power to go along with that. He's going to mix in that striking effectively with his wrestling because he is a wrestler. The entries are solid. He can land takedowns, decent takedown defense to go along with it. With Cody Brundage, however, cardio is a concern. He does slow down. That's something to watch out for. Somewhat questionable IQ in his fights as well is probably his biggest red flag. You can never feel too confident on the betting side of Cody Brundage, despite what he's capable of skill-wise. For Zach Reese, undefeated newcomer, he won on Dana White Contender Series back in August. All 6 of his wins are via first-round finish. 4 of them are via KO, TKO. 2 of them are via submission, including his last fight. To that point, of course, he's explosive. He has good power. He's going to use his height. He's going to use his reach. We see in this fight 4 inches in height, another 5 inches in reach. He's one of those fighters that fights effectively from distance, good kicks to really extend that reach advantage that he typically has. And he's knowledgeable with his grappling. Now, this fight in general is interesting because, Reese is a pretty sizable favorite, right? I mean, we know Cody Brundage does not have the best IQ. We know Cody Brundage does not have the best durability, the best cardio. But Reese, I mean, he hasn't fought in anyone, right? He's very unproven, hasn't faced good competition at all. On top of that, Reese has been effective power striking against his opposition thus far. I don't really consider his striking to necessarily be high level, right? Like, this is not some prospect that's coming in with, Adesanya style striking here. I don't really consider the striking to be high level necessarily. I just think he's faced a low level of competition, right? Now, Reese probably gets it done as the favorite here. I think the power probably translates directly to the UFC, and we know Cody Brundage has been finished before. But I can't ignore the level of competition for Zach Reese. How does he handle a wrestle heavy style that Cody Brundage is going to take to him, right? Brundage winning 2 rounds, it won't surprise me with the UFC experience that he has. Now, I don't feel confident, but at these odds, I mean, this might sound dumb when I look back at this, but at these odds, I can't ignore Cody Brundage potentially getting it done in this underdog spot. Has the UFC experience. He can take that takedown approach. He can be dangerous in his own right. And again, Zach Reese is extremely unproven. Like I said, a Zach Reese win will not surprise me here. He is the favorite. But my pick, almost strictly due to odds, is going to be Cody Brundage for this fight. Final fight of our prelims. Let's talk Miesha Tate versus Julia Avila. For Tate, she lost to Lauren Murphy. That was 17 months ago. She 2 losses in a row at this point. Improved striking compared to really the low-level striker that she's been in the past. Now, I still consider her striking to be a bit basic, but she is a bit more effective with it. Still hittable, still not the best. Her strengths are still her strengths. So she's a good grappler. She's a really good wrestler, has really good takedowns, good top control, good positioning as well. We know she's really effective in terms of her ground game. She's going up against Julia Avila, who hasn't fought in nearly 3 years, 2.5 years, 30 months exactly since her last fight. She beat Julia Stoliarenko back in June 2021. Now, she has decent striking in general. She has a good stiff jab. She can be explosive. She's not afraid to engage with her opponents. Moves a bit stiff, but she commits to her forward pressure. She can definitely get a little bit wild. Still capable of landing takedowns, that said. Good top game, just 61% takedown defense, which is going to be very relevant for this fight. Now, Avila is the favorite here, despite the 2.5-year layoff. I think that Vegas is factoring her being the much more dangerous striker. We've seen Miesha Tate touched on the feet many times, right? So that you can see why Julia Avila is the favorite here. Now, Miesha Tate should have the wrestling advantage, as she usually does, but Avila, no slouch on the ground, right? I think this is another one of those fights where I can't ignore the underdog odds. Now, it's not a huge underdog, but just being in an underdog position, I think, yes, Avila hurting Tate on the feet would not surprise me, and that is probably what happens. Avila outstriking Tate throughout the fight is probably something that happens. But despite Miesha Tate definitely being past her prime, we really got to take a look at Julia Avila, right? I mean, she's 35 years old. She's on a 2.5-year layoff. We don't know what she's going to look like. We don't know her reason for coming back. We don't know what her gas tank will be. Tate, it's not like she's been super active. It's been a year and a half, but a year and a half versus 2.5 years, I think, is a meaningful difference. I can see Tate using her takedowns against Avila's 61% takedown defense. And we know that Tate is very well conditioned to be able to do that for 3 rounds. So I think there's a legitimate path for Miesha Tate to get it done. Does the UFC want Tate to win? I can't tell, probably. But I think that Miesha Tate definitely has a path here. And I think that this might be the last time that I pick Miesha Tate as a winner, because if she doesn't get done with this one, I think it's about time that she retires. But my pick will be Miesha Tate. I think there's some value in this underdog slot for sure. Let's move on to our main card, where we have 6 fights overall. Fight number 1 of our main card, Punahele Soriano versus Dustin Stoltzfus. For Soriano, he lost to Roman Kopylov back in January. Good power in that left hand, especially as a counterpuncher. Probably his favorite punch. He has heavy hands in general, good looping punches, good combinations. He can overextend. He can miss big at times, which could cost him. But he, really has that pressure style, really wants to be that fighter coming forward. On top of that, he's a good wrestler. Though he does like to keep the fight standing, don't look for him to actively try takedowns, but he does always have that wrestling in his back pocket. That said, just 30% takedown defense, so cannot stop a takedown, which could be relevant here. Now, he is one of those fighters that you get, significantly less confidence in as the fight goes on, because he will slow down. He does not have the best cardio. But again, he's dangerous, right? Dustin Stoltzfus, on the other hand, he lost to Abus Magomedov. That was 15 months ago. He's 1-4 in the UFC now. Fairly basic, serviceable with the stand-up, has a steady pace. That jab hand stays pretty active. A lot of fakes, a lot of posting, but he's slow. He can also be chinny. I wouldn't call him a great wrestler, but he can land takedowns with decent top control and just 46% takedown defense, though it is worth noting that he is pretty comfortable on his back with pretty good defensive grappling, and he's one of those fighters that can work his way back to his feet. Now, I don't want to spend too much time here because we do see Soriano as a sizable favorite. I think that Soriano should get it done here because simply put, because Stoltzfus probably is not a UFC caliber fighter. Stoltzfus, basic striking, I think that Soriano should be the better striker. Punahele, big power threat, and we saw how quickly Stoltzfus was finished in his last fight by Magomedov, who's also known for his power. Now, Soriano, of course, in any of his fights, he runs the risk of dumping his cardio after that first round. But Stoltzfus just hasn't shown me anything at this level to think that, he'd even be able to capitalize on Soriano losing steam, right? So I think Soriano has to be the pick here pretty comfortably. I think he's going to dictate where this fight goes. I think he's going to dictate the results. And an early finish on the side of Punahele Soriano would not surprise me at all. So again, I will go with Punahele Soriano to get the job done here. Second fight of our main card, let's talk Guida versus Joaquim Silva. Guida lost to Rafa Garcia. That was back in April. I mean, at this point, 41 years old. We know his MO. We know his style is not going to change at this point. He's tough on the feet. He's going to give you a lot of movement. He's going to give you a high pace. Not a lot of striking, as we see by the numbers, but a high pace in terms of his movement. He is willing to engage. He is willing to brawl. He's going to be one of those fighters that are ultimately looking for the takedown at some point in the fight. Over 3 takedowns per fight. And he's also, at least historically, has been a cardio machine. So that's always been one of his advantages. Joaquim Silva, on the other hand, lost to Arman Tsarukyan. That was back in June. No shame there. Has a good amount of power, has good power punches, especially his hooks. Solid on the feet in general. He does mix it up pretty well. He can be explosive, but he is a bit out of control sometimes. Good in and out movement. Now, don't expect him to land takedowns, though he is a good grappler with effective top control. Also doesn't really have the best takedown defense, which will cost him for this one. 58% takedown defense specifically could be costly for this fight. Guida, of course, we know more than capable of spamming takedowns throughout the fight. But you kind of have to go with Joaquim Silva here. I mean, this is not a confident pick at all because Guida is one of those guys that will, spoil parlays, whether you're for him or against him. I mean, but like I said, you kind of have to go Silva. Guida is just too up there in age. Can't rely on Silva stopping takedowns, but when I think about him going up against Arman Tsarukyan, who is an elite wrestler in his prime, takedowns for Tsarukyan were a little bit harder to come by as the fight progressed. Guida, of course, as a fighter who isn't as big or as physically strong, it may be more difficult than anticipated for him to land takedowns throughout this fight. So from there, we know Silva will be the much more dangerous striker without a doubt. Now, like I said, can't be too confident. I'm not interested in betting on this. I think if anything, you might want to take a stab at Guida given the odds, but my prediction will be for Joaquim Silva. And this is one of those matchups where I go with Silva at least 6 times out of 10, maybe 7 times out of 10 in this type of matchup, but that's not good enough to actually bet on it. So just be wary of that. Nonetheless, my prediction will be for Joaquim Silva. Third fight on our main card. This is probably the fight that I'm looking forward to the most. We have a welterweight clash between Sean Brady and Kelvin Gastelum. Brady suffered his first loss against Belal Muhammad. That was 14 months ago. Very well-rounded as a fighter. Good boxing, good kickboxing. He's poised, he's patient, good striking IQ, good counterpuncher, good timing. Nearly 3 takedowns per fight. Very good at landing those takedowns. Good top position. Good active ground and pound. Also has 87% takedown defense to go along with it. So ultimately, he's good at dictating where the fight goes. In terms of his ground game, he is a BJJ black belt, so legitimate ground skills to go along with the wrestling, to go along with the legitimate striking that he has. I mean, his record is what it is for a reason. Kelvin Gastelum, on the other hand, unanimous decision win over Chris Curtis. That was back in April. Good striking overall, good footwork, good constant movement and constant activity. Really good boxing, good speed. And he's going to mix in an effective usage of calf kicks, very consistent throughout the fight. And his ground game is really solid. Just one takedown per fight, but he can definitely land takedowns. He is a BJJ black belt. More than anything, he's really tough, not afraid to go at it with his opponents, not afraid to be the one to push the pace, not afraid to be the one to try to implement the pressure. Kelvin Gastelum is back to welterweight in this fight, if I'm not mistaken, for the first time since 2016, which is major here. High stakes fight, high level fighters. Now, what'll work to Brady's advantage is that, he lands more takedowns, and Gastelum has just 62% takedown defense. So Brady can probably exploit that. Let's look to see if he does that. Now, what'll work to Gastelum's advantage is what we saw in his last fight against Chris Curtis. Although he was up against a good striker, Gastelum possessed better movement and proved to be the more dynamic striker. There's also a certain, hard to explain, but there's also a certain type of dog in Gastelum that Brady may not have, right? So I made similar comments about Adrian Yanez versus Jonathan Martinez, if you remember that fight a few months ago. While Yanez may have been the more talented fighter in the Sean Brady role here, Jonathan Martinez had more of that dog in him in that sort of Kelvin Gastelum role for this fight. Kelvin Gastelum back at 170, it does raise some unknowns for this fight. But, we all know that he was undersized at 185, and 170 may be a sign that he's, in a lot better shape. Still just 32 years old, still very much in his athletic prime. So I say all of that to say I like Kelvin Gastelum in this fight. He's faced some of the highest level of competition throughout a resume that we've ever seen. If we, take a moment to take a look at who Kelvin Gastelum has gone up against. Chris Curtis, Cannonier, Whitaker, Hermanson, Till, Adesanya, Souza, Bisping, Weidman, Belfort, Tim Kennedy back in the day, John Hendricks, even Anil Magny in 2015 was really good. And Nate Marquardt, Woodley. You can just continue going through his resume. He has, one of the toughest resumes that we've seen in the UFC. Whereas, Sean Brady, as soon as he faced an elite fighter, we saw what happened, right? As soon as he went up against Belal Muhammad, we saw exactly what happened. Now, a Brady win wouldn't surprise me, but even if Gastelum was a slight favorite, I think I would still pick him. So, especially as a plus 100 underdog, I'm definitely going to go with Kelvin Gastelum on this fight. I may place a straight wager on this one. I'm not recommending everyone do that, but I think there's some really good value on Kelvin Gastelum. I think he can be dynamic. I think he's energized. I think he has good momentum. I think he had a really good win over Chris Curtis, and I think he's going to implement a lot of the same things that worked in that fight in this fight against Sean Brady. So let's see how that goes. Fight number 4 of our main card, Rob Font versus Deiveson Figueiredo. For Rob Font, unanimous decision loss to Corey Sandhagen. That was back in August. Good lateral movement, effective switch stance, good sharp long jab. He's going to fight well from the outside. He also plays that stalker type of role really well. Decent forward pressure when he decides to do so. Comes from different angles as well, which makes him really hard to read on the feet. Ultimately, good overall, high-level, patient striker with a good pace, zero cardio concerns as well. And, he can land a takedown. He lands one takedown per fight. It is something I have seen him land with a decent success rate, although I wouldn't really call it a big part of his game, but just know that that aspect of his game is there as well. For Deiveson Figueiredo, he lost to Brandon Moreno back in January. His style is pretty much predicated on his power. 9 of his 21 wins via KO, TKO. Activity not really the highest. He's one of those strikers that are always looking to land that perfect shot or wait for that perfect moment to explode. Definitely been dangerous with that style though, right? Very dynamic, good counter puncher, very patient. Just 57% takedown defense, But I mean, a lot of that was, what he gave up to Brandon Moreno, 10 takedowns given up to Moreno during their 4 fights. That's going to hinder that takedown defense percentage number. Nonetheless, he is a high-level grappler. Eight of his 21 wins are via submission. He can land takedowns of his own at nearly 1.5 per 15 minutes. And again, he's a high-level grappler. Divisional debut for Deiveson Figueiredo. He's moving up in weight, and right away taking on a contender in Rob Font. We've seen him spend, ultimately the last 3 years of his career fighting the same fighter in Brandon Moreno. So it's going to be interesting to see how he fares against a different style. Figueiredo's cardio, it hasn't been amazing, but I think that 2 factors that are going to work to his advantage is, firstly, the move up in weight, and secondly, the fact that it is a 3-round fight. Now, on one hand, you want to think that Rob Font successfully defends the bantamweight division here. High-level striker, probably a better pure striker than Brandon Moreno is, and Brandon Moreno gave Deiveson Figueiredo problems. We know that Font can also land takedowns, although not often. Font also has great cardio, fights at a higher pace. So, I mean, him outstriking Figueiredo and Figueiredo not being able to figure him out throughout the fight, that would not surprise me. On the other hand, there's a number of X factors that could make you be interested in leaning Figueiredo for this fight. I think the extra weight will only help him. We know that he had a really hard time making 125, so coming up to 135, I think will be a huge difference for him. Again, 3 scheduled rounds for the first time in a long time. I think that's going to allow him to be more aggressive. And we know that he has the power to end fights, right? We know that he can land takedowns as well. And Rob Font doesn't have the best takedown defense. Now, my gut really wants to go with Deiveson Figueiredo for this fight. My brain really wants to go with the Rob Font for this fight. But I think I'm rolling with the gut. I think whereas a Brandon Moreno was a challenge to take down and keep down because he's so agile and quick and good takedown defense and knowledgeable on the ground, I think that Figueiredo will be able to use takedowns effectively against Rob Font, like we saw Corey Sandhagen do, right? Corey Sandhagen wasn't feeling the best striking-wise in that fight, and he resorted to takedowns, and he was able to land takedown after takedown in that fight. I can see Figueiredo resorting to takedowns as well, very much in that fashion. I think the freshness of a new opponent, I think it being 3 rounds, I think it being a new weight class, I think it's going to allow us to see a higher paced version of Deiveson Figueiredo. And I think he has a real shot here. Now, again, this is not a confident pick. This is a gut pick, as I described, right? I'm rolling with my gut. Deiveson Figueiredo is going to be my pick. Either way, I'm going to suggest avoiding betting on this one. Too many question marks. We don't know what's going to happen. Just enjoy the fight. But my prediction will be Deiveson Figueiredo. Fight number 5, our co-main event of this card. We have Jalen Turner taking on Bobby Green. Turner had that split decision loss to Dan Hooker. That was back in July. He was a long striker, clean striker at that. Quick hands, quick combinations, very dynamic. He's also methodical. He's more of a technical kickboxer than anything else. Likes to come forward, likes to march his opponents down a bit, but he's patient and he's super calculated. Also, just under a takedown per fight. Looks like he's improved a lot with his wrestling, improved a lot with his top control. It is an effective part of his game when he does resort to it. Also, a solid 75% takedown defense to go along with it. So he's one of those fighters, again, that can typically dictate where the fight goes in any fight that he's in. He's going up against Bobby Green, who is on a 2-fight winning streak, beating Grant Dawson back in October. Green is very dynamic as well in his striking. Likes to keep his hands down. We know he has kind of that signature style. He relies on his speed. He relies on his reflexes in terms of his striking defense. Now, it does work effectively for him. Good hand speed as well to go along with it. Good jab, just good punching in general. Also really likes that front kick, likes to move around the ring, likes to keep his opponents at distance. He's going to look for those counter punch opportunities. And don't sleep on his wrestling, right? He has it, although he doesn't really use it often. Short notice fight for Jamey-Lyn Turner. He's actually filling in for his previous opponent. He's filling in for Dan Hooker for this fight. And he's filling in on about a week and a half notice, right? Now, Jamey-Lyn Turner is one of those fighters who pretty much are always in shape. So I don't really factor it too much into the potential results of this match. That said, Bobby Green, I mean, absolutely worth a look at plus 175, just by way of having a full training camp, right? Bobby Green, I think, is worth a look in general. Very dynamic. He can put the pressure on Turner. Turner has been knocked out 3 times amongst his 7 losses. And like we saw in Bobby Green's last fight, it only takes 1 shot. Bobby Green absolutely has that level of power. So Bobby Green, I'll start off by saying very good value as an underdog in this spot. Now, the idea of this fight is, despite both guys being dynamic strikers, Jamey-Lyn Turner may be at an advantage. I think that Dan Hooker was able to give Jamey-Lyn Turner problems because he was also that tall, long, rangy striker that Jamey-Lyn Turner typically is in his fights. Bobby Green is not that, right? And I think that's going to allow Turner to be that for this fight and use those physical advantages that he has in this fight. Now, my pick is going to be Jamey-Lyn Turner. I'm relying on him as the younger, rangier striker. From a betting perspective, like I said, this may be dog or pass, but from a prediction perspective, I'm going to go with Jamey-Lyn Turner to get it done. Let's move on now to our main event of the evening. Really good high stakes lightweight fight here. We have Beneil Dariush taking on Arman Tsarukyan. For Beneil Dariush, he lost to Charles Oliveira back in June. Good stand-up, likes to throw a lot of kicks and combinations, solid power as well. One of those fighters that definitely just goes for it, right? Not afraid to engage with his opponents, not afraid to exchange with his opponents. Good diversity in his striking, also really good at working the clinch and working the takedowns. He lands nearly 2 takedowns per fight. Look for constant fakes, constant level changes as he shoots for those takedowns. And, he's relentless, not only offensively, but defensively as well. Good takedown defense at 80%, but even if he is taken down, amazing scrambling ability, amazing ability to reverse position or even work his way back up a lot of the times. Arman Tsarukyan, on the other hand, beat Joaquim Silva. That was back in June. We mentioned that earlier in the card. Good boxing, good kickboxing. I do like how he puts his punches together. Good combinations, good in and out movement. He's pretty quick as a counter puncher, and he has the power to go along with it. He has good calf kicks. He has good movement around the ring. He has good takedowns, solid top control as well. Really well-rounded fighter at the highest level, simply put. If I am being critical of him, he does make some mistakes. He, as an aggressive striker, he can leave himself open sometimes, and that's something that we really have to watch out for, especially in this fight. Now, I'll keep this short. I have to go with Tsarukyan on this. Tsarukyan is a sizable favorite. That is worth noting. But my reason is, I like Dariush against a lot of guys, right? I think his striking explosiveness, his wrestling and his grappling explosiveness, and his overall ability is great against a lot of fighters, except guys who can match that ground game and guys who are good strikers. And, I think that's going to be the case in this fight. Now, Arman Tsarukyan has been touched a few times. He's been, caught a few times in striking exchanges, and Dariush can definitely catch him as well. But one thing that he does really well is, he forces that clinching and that wrestling when he needs to, when he does get touched. On top of that, Dariush has, 5 losses. 4 of them are via KO TKO. So he hasn't been the most durable guy. I can see both guys pushing a pace with the striking. I can see both guys defending takedowns really well. Ultimately, I think the striking exchanges is what's going to cost Beneil Dariush as the fighter who has been less durable throughout his career. Again, I pick Tsarukyan in this matchup at least 8 times out of 10. Now, it is worth noting, I still expect this to be a competitive fight. But like I said, I just have to go with Arman Tsarukyan on this at least 8 times out of 10. So Tsarukyan will be my prediction to get it done. Let's take it to Vegas. Let's take a look at some underdog picks as well as some parlay picks. Now, for this card, there are a number of underdogs that I do believe have value. So just sort of honorable mentions in some ways. I think Solecki has value. I think Brundage has value. I think Tate has value. I could even say Guida has value. But my Davison Figueiredo has value, right? But my underdog pick for this card will absolutely be Kelvin Gastelum. I feel kind of 60-40 on this fight on the side of Gastelum, and that's good enough to make me pick him for my underdog of the night. Now, in terms of parlay action, like I said, Tsarukyan, 8 times out of 10 at least, I have to go with him in this fight, despite how competitive it is, despite it being a main event. Main events all year have been really tricky to pick, but I think Tsarukyan gets it done. I also think that Punahele Soriano gets it done. Now, again, he always runs the risk of cardio dumping after one round. But even if that happens, I don't think Stoltzfus is good enough to do anything about it. So I really like Punahele Soriano in this spot. And I'm also going to go with the newcomer, Rodolfo Bellato. Now, again, there are some concerns. He is a newcomer that always raises flags. It is a light heavyweight fight, so one punch on either side can really change the results of the fight. But like I said, I think his striking should be more effective. I think he has a significant ground advantage, and Ihor Potieria has really bad cardio that I just cannot ignore. So I'm looking at those 3 fights. I'm really liking how that's shaping out as a 2.17. That would mean $100 will get you a total return of $217. And for our bigger bettors, $250 will get you a total return of $543. So let's officially sign off there. This has been UFC Fight Night. Arman Tsarukyan, or I should say UFC Fight Night, Beneil Dariush versus Arman Tsarukyan. Full card prediction video presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. Again, please make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video. Let's get the word out. Let's spread it. Let's share it to whoever needs to see it. Please subscribe to the channel here as well at Boxing MMA Picks. And most importantly, want to hear from you in the comments. How do you feel about the underdog pick that I provided? How do you feel about the fact that I have 4 or 5 underdogs that I'm going with for this card? How do you feel about my parlay picks, my sort of favorite picks, for lack of a better word? What parlay picks are you looking at? What potential props are you looking at? Let all of that conversation happen in the comments, and we're more than happy to have those discussions with you. Otherwise, again, officially signing off. This has been UFC Fight Night, Beneil Dariush versus Arman Tsarukyan. Full card prediction video presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. Harris flying solo today, but it's all good. In our usual fashion, let's get this money.